The snow fell heavy over the Colorado mountains, each flake whispering like the voice of the dead. Clara Whitmore pushed forward through the storm, her once fine blue dress torn and stiff with ice. She could barely see more than a few feet ahead. The wind screamed through the pines, cutting through her shawl like knives. She had been walking for hours, maybe days, her mind too numb to know. Her boots were gone, ripped apart by rocks and thorns. Blood streaked the snow where her bare feet touched. She didn't feel it anymore. She didn't feel anything. Not the pain, not the cold, not the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders. "Let it end here," she whispered to the storm. "Please, let it end." Clara's knees buckled, and she fell into a snowdrift. The world blurred, white above, white below, white forever. She thought of her husband's debts, of the men who came calling after his death, and of the terrible deal she had almost been forced to accept. Better the snow, she thought, than that life. She closed her eyes and waited for the silence. Then, through the roar of wind, came a sound that didn't belong there. Hoofbeats. Slow, steady, growing louder. She wanted to hide, but her body refused to move. A shadow loomed over her, tall and broad, like a ghost of the wilderness itself. "Damn fool woman," came a deep, rough voice. "You trying to die out here?" Through the haze, she saw a man wrapped in heavy furs, his beard thick with frost, his eyes gray as the storm around them. He looked like the mountain had carved him itself, hard, quiet, and alone. His name was Elias Granger, though she wouldn't learn that until later. He knelt beside her, pulling off a glove to check her neck for a pulse. Her skin was ice cold. Still, he felt a faint heartbeat beneath his fingers. "Still alive," he muttered, barely. Elias had lived alone in these mountains for 6 winters, trapping and trading to survive. He'd seen bodies before, men who underestimated nature, gold seekers who never made it home, but never a woman. Not one dressed like she'd stepped out of a Denver ballroom. He lifted her into his arms, surprised by how light she was. She stirred faintly, mumbling something he couldn't make out. A name, maybe. He didn't ask questions. Survival first, talk later. Elias whistled low. His horse, a broad-shouldered bay named Brutus, emerged from the storm. "Easy, boy," he said, heaving her across the saddle. "Just another lost soul." The ride back to his cabin was slow and brutal. Wind slashed their faces. Snow rose to the horse's knees, but Elias never loosened his grip on the unconscious woman. Her head rested against his chest, her breath shallow but still there. By the time they reached his cabin, his beard was a solid wall of ice, and her skin had turned pale as marble. He kicked the door open and stepped inside, slamming it shut behind them. The small cabin glowed faintly from the fire that had never quite died in the hearth. It was simple: a single room, stone fireplace, rough-hewn table, one bed. No comfort, just survival. But it was warm, and that was enough. He laid her gently on the bed, then threw more wood on the fire until the warmth rolled through the room. Her clothes were soaked through, stiff with frost. Leaving them on would kill her as surely as the snow. He hesitated only a moment. "Forgive me," he said quietly, then worked carefully, removing the frozen layers and wrapping her in heavy wool blankets. Her skin was bruised, scratched, and far too thin. Whoever she was, she hadn't been treated kindly. When she was settled, Elias mixed a cup of pine needle tea for strength and set it near the fire. He cleaned her cuts with water warmed in a tin pot, his hands rough but gentle. As he worked, she stirred again, her lips parted. "Samuel," she whispered. "I'm sorry." "Shh," Elias said. "Ain't no Samuel here. You're safe now." Her hand reached out blindly. He caught it, surprised at how cold it felt. Her grip was weak, but desperate, like a drowning soul clutching for shore. He stayed there until her breathing steadied, until her eyes fluttered open for a moment. "Who are you?" she breathed. "Elias Granger," he said. "You're lucky I found you before the storm buried you." Quote. "Then maybe I'm not lucky," she murmured, her voice breaking. His jaw tightened. "You're alive. That's luck enough." She closed her eyes again, whispering something he couldn't hear, and drifted back into unconsciousness. Elias sat by the fire long after that, staring into the flames. He didn't know who she was or what had driven her into the mountains, but it wasn't his concern. Or so he told himself. Still, something about her stirred memories he'd buried long ago. Memories of loss, of regret, of things he'd done in another life far from these cold hills. Outside, the storm howled against the cabin walls, but inside, a fragile peace settled. He checked her pulse one more time, adjusted the blankets, and sat back in his chair. For 6 years, this cabin had been his penance, his prison and his shelter. But tonight, with a stranger's heartbeat joining his own, it felt different. Elias Granger, the man who'd long ago given up saving anyone, not even himself, had just saved a life. And deep down, though he wouldn't admit it, something in him had begun to thaw. When Clara woke, sunlight streamed through the cabin's single window, painting warm lines across the wooden walls. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The smell of pine and smoke filled her nose. The ceiling above was rough-hewn logs, not the painted plaster of her Denver home. Then memory struck. The storm, the fall, the man. "Easy," came a calm voice from near the fire. Elias Granger sat at the table, cleaning a rifle with careful, steady hands. His beard caught the morning light, and his expression was unreadable. "You've been out for 2 days." Clara sat up slowly, wincing as the world tilted. She was covered to the chin in thick blankets. Beneath them, she wore an oversized flannel shirt that clearly wasn't hers. Panic flared, but he didn't look up, giving her space to gather herself. "Your clothes are drying by the fire," he said matter-of-factly. "Would have killed you to leave 'em on?" She glanced toward the hearth, where her torn dress hung beside his coat. Her cheeks flushed, though his tone carried no hint of impropriety, just survival. "Thank you," she managed, her voice small. "There's coffee if you're strong enough to sit," he said, nodding to the tin mug near the fire. The first sip burned, then spread warmth through her chest. "I owe you my life, Mr. Granger." He shrugged. "You don't owe me anything. You were dying out there." Anyone with sense would have done the same. But Clara knew that wasn't true. In this world, kindness was rarer than gold. She studied him as he worked. His movements were efficient, precise, like a man who'd lived too long alone. "How long have you lived up here?" she asked. 6 winters, he said simply. "Long enough." Long enough for what? To forget what I came here to forget. The finality in his voice told her not to press. She sipped her coffee in silence, the crackle of fire filling the space between them. Over the next days, they fell into a quiet rhythm. Elias hunted and chopped wood, while Clara cleaned, cooked, and mended what she could. Her strength returned slowly, though her thoughts remained tangled with fear. Somewhere down in the valleys below, men were looking for her. Men who belonged to Richard Hartley, her late husband's creditor. Richard had called it business. He'd said she could erase her dead husband's debts by marrying him. When she'd refused, he'd made clear refusal wasn't an option. That's why she'd fled into the mountains. Better death than being owned. Elias never asked about her past, and yet he seemed to know she carried ghosts. He offered silence instead of questions, and for the first time in months, she felt safe. She started cooking small meals again, stews, cornbread, and once even biscuits. When Elias tasted them, a faint smile ghosted across his face. "Been a long time since I had food that didn't come out of a tin," he said. "I'm glad to be useful." "You don't have to be," he said, but she caught the quiet gratitude behind his words. One night, while he read by firelight, she dared to speak again. "You were a soldier, weren't you?" He looked up slowly. "Once." "The scar," she said softly, nodding to his shoulder. "I saw it when you were changing bandages." Quote, he nodded, eyes distant. "I did things I ain't proud of, things that didn't end when the war did." She hesitated. "You saved me." "That counts for something." He looked into the fire. "Maybe. Or maybe I'm just trying to even a scale that'll never balance." The wind moaned outside, rattling the shutters. Clara shivered, but it wasn't the cold. She saw in him the same thing she felt in herself, a heart trying to forgive what couldn't be undone. "Do you ever get lonely?" she asked quietly. "Lonely's safer," he said. "No one gets hurt that way." Do you really believe that?" He looked up, eyes gray and stormy. "Don't you?" Her breath caught. "I used to. Until now." He said nothing, but his gaze softened, and she saw the faintest crack appear in his walls. Days passed, and the snow began to ease. Clara found small ways to help him, patching a coat, stacking wood, humming while she worked. Sometimes she caught him watching her from the corner of his eye, as if listening to a memory he'd long forgotten. One afternoon, she joined him outside, where he was repairing the roof. "Let me help," she said. He frowned. "You'll freeze." "I've survived worse." She climbed the ladder before he could argue. They worked side by side in the pale sunlight, their breaths clouding in the cold air. Once, when the wind made her stumble, his hand shot out to steady her. For a moment, their eyes met, his hand warm around hers, her heart hammering in her chest. "Thank you," she whispered. He pulled away quickly, jaw tight. "Go inside before you fall." But when she turned, she saw him glance after her, something unspoken flickering in his eyes. That evening, she found him by the fire, reading again. She sat across from him, pretending to sew, though her hands trembled. The silence between them felt different now, charged, alive. "Why do you live alone up here?" she asked finally. He turned a page slowly. "Because some men don't deserve peace. And yet you saved me." He met her gaze across the firelight. "Maybe I needed saving too." Clara's throat tightened. "No one deserves to be alone forever." "Maybe not," he said, his voice low, "but some of us forget how to be anything else." For a long while, neither spoke. Only the fire crackled, throwing sparks up the chimney. That night, as the wind sighed against the cabin, Elias lay awake on his cot near the fire. Across the room, Clara slept soundly, the firelight painting her face in soft gold. He told himself he'd done what any decent man would, rescued a stranger, offered her shelter. But deep down, he knew the truth. He'd stopped being a man who cared long ago. Until her. And that terrified him more than any storm. By the time spring's first thaw touched the Colorado mountains, Clara's strength had returned, but her heart carried a new kind of weight. Each sunrise brought warmth back to the world, yet the thought of leaving Elias's cabin chilled her more than any storm. The snow melted in rivulets outside, filling the creek that ran behind the cabin. Inside, life settled into quiet rhythms. Clara cooked while Elias split logs. In the evenings, they sat by the fire, talking about small things, weather, books, the sound of the wind through the trees. But beneath those words, something deeper grew. One morning she found him at the table with 2 mugs of coffee already poured. "Storm's clearing," he said. "Roads will open soon. I can take you down to Fort Collins. You can catch a stage from there." She tried to smile, but it faltered. "And go where?" "Wherever you want," he said, not meeting her eyes. She stared into her coffee. "Do you want me to go?" quote. He hesitated too long. "It's safer." The answer cut deeper than she expected. "For who?" "For both of us," he said quietly. Clara rose, walking to the window. The mountains stretched endlessly, snow sparkling like glass under the morning sun. "I thought I'd never be warm again," she whispered. "Then I met you." He said nothing. His silence spoke louder than words ever could. That evening, she packed her small bundle, what remained of her torn dress, a few keepsakes, the carved wooden comb she'd found among his things that he insisted she keep. But her hands shook. The idea of walking out that door felt like tearing something sacred in half. As she sat by the fire one last time, Elias entered quietly. He'd shaved, trimmed his hair, even changed into a clean shirt. For a moment, he looked like the man he might have been before the war, before solitude had turned him to stone. "You should get some rest," he said softly. "I can't," she lifted her head. "I keep thinking about what happens when I leave, about what waits for me down there." "You'll be fine," he said. Her voice trembled. "And you?" He looked at the flames. "I've been fine on my own for a long time." "That's not true," she said, standing. "You've survived, not lived." "There's a difference." He turned toward her, eyes shadowed but soft. "And what would you have me do, Clara? Pretend we can just stay here forever?" "Why not?" she whispered. "This cabin saved me. You saved me. Maybe it could save you too." He stepped closer, the distance between them vanishing like breath in winter air. "You think I'm the kind of man who deserves saving?" She held his gaze, steady and unafraid. "I think you're the kind of man who already has been." Quote, For a long heartbeat, the world went still, the fire crackling, snow dripping from the roof, his gray eyes searching hers. Then, slowly, he reached out and took her hand. "I don't know how to start again," he said. "You just did." He looked down at their joined hands, rough fingers against soft skin, and something inside him gave way. The walls he'd built for years crumbled beneath the weight of her quiet faith. "I tried to let you go," he said hoarsely. "But every time I look at that door, I see you walking out of it, and I—" She stopped him with a gentle touch to his face. "Then don't." He closed his eyes, leaning into her palm, the battle between duty and desire breaking like thawing ice. When he opened them again, the decision was made. "Stay," he said simply. "Not because you owe me anything. Not because I saved you. Stay because you want to." Her eyes filled with tears. "I've wanted nothing else." He pulled her close then, the kind of embrace that spoke of things too deep for words. Pain, gratitude, redemption. For the first time in years, Elias Granger allowed himself to feel. Outside, the mountains sighed as spring finally broke through the last of winter's grip. Inside, two lost souls found their footing. In the days that followed, life changed quietly. Clara tended a small garden behind the cabin, while Elias began repairing the fences and traps he'd long abandoned. The laughter that drifted through those woods was new, fragile but real. Sometimes, when the wind carried the scent of pine and thawed earth, Elias would look up from his work and see her standing by the porch, hair shining in the sun, and he'd feel something he'd thought buried forever. Peace. One evening, as they watched the sun sink behind the peaks, Clara spoke softly. "You ever think about going back? To the world down there?" He shook his head. "I used to think the world ended where these trees began, but maybe this is it. Maybe this is enough." She smiled faintly. "It is for me." He reached over, taking her hand, thumb brushing against the small scar on her wrist, a reminder of everything they'd survived. "Guess we both needed a place to start over." Clara looked up at the sky where the first stars appeared, their light, clear and steady. "Maybe we didn't find this mountain," she said. "Maybe it found us." Elias squeezed her hand gently. "Then we'll honor it by living." The fire crackled behind them, its glow spilling out through the open door. Inside, their simple home stood quiet and warm, a testament to second chances and love earned through hardship. For the first time since she'd fled the life that had nearly destroyed her, Clara felt free. And for the first time in 6 long years, Elias Granger didn't feel alone. The snow would return someday. It always did. But they would face it together now. Because what began as a rescue had become something far greater. Not salvation, not repayment, but love, honest, hard-won, and real as the mountains themselves.